Greetings and welcome to another episode of Unpacking Islamophobia, a podcast project from the The.Bridge.Initiative at Georgetown University. My name is Arsalan Iftikhar. I am a human rights lawyer, senior fellow at the The.Bridge.Initiative, and author of Fear of a Muslim Planet, Global Islamophobia in the New World Order. My guest today is Amira Elghawaby, the first official special representative on combating Islamophobia for the Canadian government under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Amira Elghawaby is a journalist and longtime human rights advocate who, prior to her appointment, was a contributing columnist at the Toronto Star and also a frequent media commentator as well. Amira most recently led strategic communications and campaigns at the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, and she also previously worked promoting the civil liberties of Canadian Muslims for 5 years at the NCCM, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, between 2012 and 2017. Amira, assalamu alaikum, and thank you for joining us today.
Alaikum assalam. Thanks so much, Arslan, for having me on the show.
Well, Amira, let's jump right in. In January 2023, your Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, announced that he would be appointing a special representative on combating Islamophobia, the first one ever, to tackle racism, discrimination, and religious intolerance faced by millions of Canadian Muslims every day. Justin Trudeau said, quote, "Diversity truly is one of Canada's greatest strengths, but for many Muslims, Islamophobia is all too familiar, and we need to change that." So in their statement appointing you, Amira, as the special representative, they said that, quote, "In her capacity as special representative, Amira Elghawaby will fill the position to be an advisor, expert, and representative to support and strengthen the government's efforts to combat Islamophobia, systemic racism, racial discrimination, and religious intolerance." Amira, my first question to you is, can you please give me some historical context and tell us a little bit about how this position came into existence in the first place?
No, thanks so much, Arslan. So, this position really came out of a very concerted advocacy effort from Canadian Muslim communities, in particular from London, Ontario, where just 2 years ago, almost, June 6th is the sad anniversary of a terrible, terrorist attack, essentially, on a multi-generational family, the Afzal family, who on June 6th, 2021, were out for an evening walk and were targeted in a hate attack by an individual who, saw them walking in the street. They were visibly Muslim, and, ran his truck into them, killing, a mother, a father, a grandmother, and a daughter, and leaving a 9-year-old boy, essentially without his family. And that horrific and horrible attack, of course, shocked the country, shocked communities. And, it was very sad, because it wasn't, sadly, the first time that there had been a massacre of Muslims in this country. In fact, as many of your viewers and listeners will know, in 2017, there was an attack on a Quebec City mosque where 6 worshippers were killed, where, again, an individual consumed by anti-Muslim hate walked into a prayer room at the mosque and shot indiscriminately, killing those who were there, six men, fathers, members of the communities. And even in between there was an attack on a volunteer caretaker at a mosque in Toronto that a lot of people don't even know about. And that individual who stabbed the volunteer to death was, in fact, associated with neo-Nazi far-right groups as well. So sadly, when London happened, brought the count very tragic in this country to making Canada, the #1 G7 country where Muslims have been killed in deadly Islamophobic attacks, and really led to a call on the federal government first to have an Islamophobia summit in which community members can talk about this type of victimization and attack and terrorizing of our communities. And from that summit, we had a number of recommendations, over 100 recommendations. Among them was the creation of this office. And so, the federal government committed to addressing those recommendations and posted for this position. I applied along with many, many other qualified folks. and was appointed in January to take on this role, the first of its kind, as you mentioned, and really to address not only the type of Islamophobia that leads to the type of hate that can lead to these deadly attacks, as well as other types of hate attacks and incidents, but also to look at systemic Islamophobia within our federal institutions and to find ways to address that.
That's fantastic. Amira, your nomination, as many people know, was not without political controversy. And in your opinion, how much of that was fueled by Islamophobia? And can you share with us a little bit about that experience for you?
Well, I think it's important to understand that whenever we have talked about Islamophobia in this country and tried to bring forward awareness and to address it, whether it was with Motion 103 that was brought forward by Member of Parliament Iqra Khalid a few years ago. She brought it forward in 2016. It became a really controversial issue right around the massacre in Quebec City, where people were not, and elected officials were not necessarily accepting even the term Islamophobia. And that had a lot of contention and led to anti-Muslim rallies right across the country, where people sadly were trying to suggest that, to address Islamophobia, which is very important to articulate, is about systemic racism, it's about discrimination, it's about viewing our communities as security threats. It's not about shutting down free speech. It's not about saying to folks they can't criticize Islam. Criticize all you want. We're talking about racism and hate. And yet those types of discussions really created a lot of controversy and a lot of backlash against our communities simply for wanting to talk about this really disturbing phenomenon of Islamophobia, along with other forms of religious discrimination. And so, we've just sort of seen a continuous and ongoing sort of resistance to having this discussion. And only after the attack in London, Ontario, did we actually start to see an acceptance of the term Islamophobia, acceptance of the realization that we are talking about a fundamental form of hate and racism in this country that we have to address. So I think even in the creation of this office, we still see resistance to the need for this work. But just as we would want to combat anti-Semitism, and there is a special envoy on anti-Semitism and Holocaust remembrance, just as we would want to address that phenomenon and other forms of hate, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous hate, anti-Asian racism, the list sadly goes on, we really do need to address Islamophobia in this country because it undermines our overall sense of belonging. It undermines democracy. And it's just one of the many ways that there are different factions in our communities that are trying to create division and polarization. And so addressing any form of these types of hatred really is about addressing the social cohesion that makes our country strong.
Amira, looking at some of the challenges ahead, as you know, millions of Canadian Muslims across your country face challenges on a daily basis. On the legislative front, for example, the debate over Bill 21 in Quebec, known as the, quote, act respecting the laïcité of the state, laïcité meaning secularism, still continues today. As you know, Canada's top court has upheld most of the bill, which bars civil servants in positions of court authority from wearing religious symbols at work, which can include the hijab, the turban, a kippah, yarmulke while at work. And in an August 2022 study found that 3 years of the aftermath of Bill 21 had a, quote, devastating impact on religious minorities. And even Quebec federal judge Marc-André Blanchard wrote in an April 2021 decision that all of the, quote, evidence undoubtedly shows that the effects of Bill 21 negatively will impact Muslim women first and foremost, and with disproportionate consequences. So Amira, as the first special representative on combating Islamophobia, in your opinion, what do you think are some of the challenges ahead for the work that you have to do in this position?
No, I think it's so critical that this role is about giving voice to communities across this country to share the way that Islamophobia is limiting and holding them back from fully participating in public life, in contributing. And so whether I was visiting with Muslim communities in Montreal, in Quebec, just this past weekend, whether it's Edmonton and Calgary that I was at a few weeks ago, or London, Ontario, where the attack on the Afzal family happened, consistently across the country, what we're hearing is a real concern that Islamophobia is potentially keeping folks from, again, fulfilling their full potential. The worry about systemic Islamophobia in the workplace, on transit, public transit, where, for instance, in Edmonton, we had a spate of very, very troubling and violent attacks on Black Muslim women who visibly identify with a hijab. When I was there in Edmonton, I'm still hearing from Muslim women who are saying they're still scared to go out sometimes. In fact, they'll sometimes call their friends and want to go out in a group versus be out on their own. And so what we know is that hate crimes are message crimes. And sadly, the message is one of quite some concern, especially when we see data, for instance, that shows from 2020 to 2021, hate crimes targeting Muslims has gone up by 71% in this country. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because the majority of folks don't actually report. So I think what we see in terms of the challenges is how are we going to look for ways to address this? What sort of strategies can we put together to combat this phenomenon? And how are we going to, as I said, ensure that Muslim communities are able to express what it is they're concerned about, as well as be in allyship with other minority communities who are similarly struggling with issues of discrimination and hate that are similarly holding them back?
As a human rights lawyer myself, I want to unpack a little bit about, the bias-motivated attacks against Muslims in the last few years that you've mentioned. As you mentioned, in January 2017, a 20-something Trump supporter walked into a mosque in Quebec City and shot and killed 6 innocent Muslims while they slept. Even though he couldn't vote in American elections, the shooter was a huge fan of Donald Trump, proudly posting selfies on social media while wearing the red, quote, "Make America Great Again" MAGA hats. He had actually spent hours, according to Quebec City Police, searching on the internet for Donald Trump over 800 times. Another, as you mentioned, the Afzaal family, who were brutally mowed down by a guy simply for wearing ethnic Muslim garb. People often think that it must have just been like a road rage incident, but actually the police found out that the Afzaal family actually were walking by this guy's house, and he was sitting watching TV, and he saw them in their Muslim garb, got out of his house, went into his car, and mowed them down. I mean, that is about as bias motivated as you can get. And so, Amira, as the special representative on combating Islamophobia, what have you found that has meant for Muslim communities living across the country? My wife's family they actually live in Calgary, Alberta, so we know about all the Edmonton, Calgary stories that are going on also. So when you visit these communities, what are they saying to you as a government official in terms of what they view their future as Canadians moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a mixed bag of both hope and trepidation. So there is a lot of hope in the fact that the federal government has indeed appointed a position like this, created an office. I have a budget and a staff and a team that will be looking at, as I said, creating strategies to address this and counter Islamophobia and work with communities. So there's hope that this position even exists. But the trepidation, of course, is, will anything actually change on the ground fundamentally for people? Will we actually be able to, for instance, walk, with a hijab, as I'm wearing right now, without having to look over my shoulder? Or, when we go to mosque, say for Eid prayers or a public gathering, are we always not going to have that little bit of nervousness and fear that someone may walk in and do harm? I heard from people and women in London, Ontario, for example, who, one lady said that her son, a little young boy, still kind of pushes her into the sidewalk anytime he hears a car that seems to be driving very fast, right? Or others who say that when they are in the place of worship in a mosque, they're always checking where are the exit signs, just in case they have to make, sadly, a mad dash should an active shooter. And I was in Markham, Ontario, just during Ramadan, where there had been an attack. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but where they were talking now about getting active shooter training for the congregation. So, it's, as I said, hope that we can address this type of fear and anxiety in our communities, and really lean on the fact that at least half of Canadians have even said in a recent poll done by a campaign called Sharing Halal that I just saw by Maple Lodge Farms that has put out a new survey out from Leger, which shows that 46% of Canadians say they would want to be an ally to our communities. We'd like to see the number higher, no doubt, and who've also said that they would like more resources on how to be allies to Muslims. So, you know, I think we have to really find our allies. I think we have to stand again in solidarity with other communities facing similar discrimination and fear. And we need to find similar strategies, because oftentimes if I'm going to address, for instance, Islamophobic hate, some of the tools to address it will actually help address anti-Semitic hate or anti-Asian hate. So we have a lot of opportunity here with this dedicated office to look at this. And I'm hopeful, and I think what I've heard is, as I said, hope, and we'll try to, through our actions, through results, demonstrate that, you know, the trepidation can subside, and we can indeed move forward.
And, you know, I want to end my last question, you know, on that note of hope in terms of the future of community engagement. You mentioned that June 6th, 2023, upcoming, will mark the second anniversary of the murder of the 4 members of the Afzal family, and all of the flags in the local school district in Thames Valley will be lowered at half-mast, and school signs will reflect a message of support for, quote, our London family, as the Afzal family has become known. There are other positive developments related to Muslims in Canada, as you know, such as the Peel District School Board in Ontario adopting a plan to combat Islamophobia in January 2023. For people who don't know, the Peel Public School Board voted to adopt this landmark strategy, saying it's the first in Canada to create a detailed plan to affirm Muslim identities and dismantle Islamophobia. So Amira, you know, looking towards the future in terms of, again, just on the note of hope of community engagement, how hopeful are you, or how hopeful are people that you speak with, you know, in terms of, you know, their belief on whether this office can really impact and help combat Islamophobia across Canada? And what do you hope to do moving forward into the future as you move into this position even more?
Well, absolutely. It's really important to see different levels of government, and as well as school boards, looking at ways to address Islamophobia. A lot of people don't realize that our communities are extremely young. There is about 1.8 Muslims living in Canada right now, very, very culturally diverse and very young as well. You know, we have over 50% are under the age of 35. You know, 25% are under the age of 15. So we're very present right through, you know, schools, institutions, universities. And so ensuring that young people and older people and everybody in between is able to fully participate without that fear of Islamophobia is critical. And institutions do have a responsibility in ensuring, just as we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to be ensuring that we're also thinking about religious discrimination, and how we ensure that there is religious literacy, that there is an understanding of the diversity of various communities, and how, you know, the type of discrimination that folks may experience based on their religious identities, how we have to counter that. So even in London, Ontario, you know, where I plan to be for the second anniversary, and I was there within about a month of taking on this position, I heard there how the City of London has put together an anti-Islamophobia strategy, that they have now hired a anti-Islamophobia liaison officer who's working with communities to work with the city and ensure that Islamophobia is addressed at that municipal level. So we have examples where, as I said, you know, allies, people are coming together, those in various responsible positions are recognizing that Islamophobia, just as other forms of hate, really do undermine our collective sense of well-being and cohesion. And we do need to work together to strengthen a pluralistic society where everyone feels they can participate fully. It's just the right thing to do.
Amira Elghawaby, Canada's first ever special representative on combating Islamophobia. Thank you for joining the Unpacking Islamophobia podcast with us today.
Thanks so much, Arslan, for having me on the show.
And thank you for watching. For more information, please visit bridge.georgetown.edu. Thank you very much.